podcast starts.
Hello, faithful listener. Welcome back to the podcast that you've hopefully heard before, otherwise you wouldn't be coming back. This is the show in which we talk about horror, sometimes we talk about other things, and sometimes we swear, so consider yourself warned. This week, my wonderful co-host is...
Stella, again.
It's always a pleasure, and I'm TD Velasquez, but everyone can call me Dan, that's fine. How are you doing, Stella?
I'm alright. I've got the Wednesday... I had a bit of the Wednesday slump this afternoon, but I think now it's the evening. I'm realising slowly but surely that it's Thursday tomorrow, and then that means it's Friday the day after.
Right. Yeah, getting there.
Yeah, getting there. That's my feeling today. Oh, we're getting there.
Yeah, you're over the hump. So, cool. And, yeah, similar feeling for me, really. Yeah. Obviously, for the listener, if you listen to this when it drops, it'll be Friday anyway. And we're edging ever closer to Halloween. So, well, I suppose that makes me want to go straight into my bit of news, which is just I found out that over Halloween weekend, the Horror Channel are doing a kind of a marathon of classic Universal horror movies.
Oh, that's lovely.
And I think I'm actually possibly going to try and watch all of them. I mean, given my personal circumstances with my mum and stuff, that might not actually be possible. But I really like the idea of just sitting down and imbibing about 12 classic horror films, many of which I've never seen before. There's quite a lot of Universal films I never got round to. But I think, there's some of the Mummy films on, and the Wolfman, and things like that. I'll put a link in the show notes to an article on Den of Geek, which lists everything. So the listener knows. But
I'll tell my students about that, because we did Universal and Hammer in week 2, and they watched the Hammer film that I asked them to watch for the lesson. But apart from that, most of them were like, "No, we've never watched any of these films." So I'll tell them that they're all on Halloween weekend. So when they stagger in from the pub, maybe they can stick one on.
Yeah. I mean, I think, they've got no excuse really, because whatever time of day they get back from the pub or night, or whatever time they stop carousing, there'll be a film on. So, and I do feel slightly guilty because I'm a big Hammer fan, as you know, and all that, but my knowledge is a bit spotty about early horror, which Kirsty's a lot better on. But this is a good opportunity to catch up with some things. And I do find them, just all of those kind of Hollywood films of that time, because they were really banged out in a studio system, they were like production line, they are just, there's something very relaxing about how well made they all are. Even if, obviously they're not all classics, but it's like they were just professionals. Yeah. And, directors like, I don't know, R.
James
William
Whale.
Neal or whoever, they were just guys who had to make so many movies per year, and it's like, what am I doing for the next 2 weeks? I'm doing The Wolfman. And
then it's zombies, and then it's...
And I really like them. I do love those Universal Sherlock Holmes films as well, which are kind of connected to the horror movement. And I have seen all of those because I'm a bit obsessive about some certain Sherlock Holmes things. So, I can easily see myself really enjoying that weekend. So I just wanted to mention that. Have you got any news in the horror world that you want to bring up?
The only thing I can mention, and I don't have any details, I don't think there's any details yet, is announced on iHorror that there's going to be a Japanese remake of The Cube. Did you watch
the
Cube?
Canadian horror movie.
Yeah, that was pretty intense anyway, but I feel like a Japanese remake in 2021 would be pretty good. So I'm looking forward to that.
And it doesn't usually happen in that direction, does it?
No, so it's interesting to see it going the other way, Speaking of Halloween, I do actually have an interesting plan for Halloween, because I haven't for years. Me and my mate are going to go and watch It's by, is it Walk the Plank or Whirligig Productions? I can find the link and put it in the show notes anyway. But they're not far from me, just in Stoke. There's going to be a showing of the Blair Witch Project in the woods.
Right. Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. So it's, as far as I'm aware, is that, you know, they have a big screen set up and there'll be some cover, but they've said, you know, bring blankets and bring something to sit on and warm clothes and, you know, someone, the partner to go to the toilet with.
Right, nice.
But yeah, the Blair Witch Project in the woods, so that's going to be that good. So that's on Saturday the 30th, which leaves me the 31st to do stuff with my daughter.
Oh, lovely. So that's Stoke-on-Trent, isn't it?
Yeah, yes.
Right.
I'll find the link and we can put it in the show notes if anyone fancies it. It's only £7. Yeah. So.
Oh, wow. I love Stoke. I used to work there. It's a lovely place and I'd love an excuse to go back, but I won't be able to make this, unfortunately. But I hope lots of other people will. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. So we're doing that. So we're very excited.
Excellent. And it's not really a bit of news, and I don't really know any details, but I've just noticed on my phone just before we started recording that the Evolution of Horror podcast, which is the podcast that all horror podcasts must bow to, even though I suppose technically because me and Howard started doing the Lee Cushing podcast in 2016, I've been podcasting longer than the Evolution of Horror has been around, but the Evolution of Horror has very quickly become preeminent because it's got a really good format, kind of exploring horror subgenre by subgenre. You know, each series is focused on a different subgenre of horror. I think at the moment they're doing sci-fi horror, and you just kind of a couple of years ago, I loved the zombie one because you find yourself just led through maybe a horror genre that you haven't properly explored before, and they go into great detail on it, and it's lovely. But they also do random special episodes just on topical topics. Those two words don't work very well together, but and so I've just noticed they've just dropped a Scream 25th anniversary special episode.
Oh, well, that's for me.
Yeah, so and me too. So yeah, it's so long since I've watched any of those movies.
It's been showing in cinemas, hasn't it? I keep seeing people popping up on social media going, "Oh, I've just watched Scream again on the big screen," and I've been like, "Oh."
Oh, right. I mean, I think I'd heard something about that, but I didn't know it was a wide-ranging thing. Okay, cool. Because, yeah, assuming I go and see the new one on the big screen, Scream is probably the only franchise where I've seen every film on the big screen. Yeah. So, yeah, in fact, I saw Scream 2 in a double bill with Scream 1.
Ah, nice.
Which was a wonderful experience because Scream had been out for a while by that point.
Yeah.
Loads of people in the audience were wearing Scream masks and stuff. It was like being in the opening scene of Scream 2.
So they achieved all of their meta-narrative right there.
It's like, yeah, just kind of... there was like an infinite regression of meta quality to that screening. It was great. It was really good.
On Friday, I was in my horror class. I was teaching slashers on Friday. So I've got in Scream 2, when they go and see the movie Stab, well, I've got a Stab t-shirt. So that's good. And there's two of my students were like, nice t-shirt. It's like, extra marks.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's great. I'm glad that
they got it.
I'm glad that. Yeah, I'm glad that somebody's marketing that as well. That's fantastic.
It's a good one.
I was always slightly disappointed in Scream 3 that they jumped straight to Stab 3.
Yeah. I
understand why they did that because it's part 3, but we never saw anything of Stab 2.
There'll be some terrible fan fiction out there about it if you want to. It will exist in a form somewhere, and it will probably be terrible.
You're right on that one, absolutely. So that brings us through the news for this week, I think. So, listener, in a little while you'll be hearing from our good friend Howard. He and I were able to phone each other up and delve once again into the bag of death, which we haven't been able to do for a few weeks. And hopefully this will become a new regular feature of the show once again. But first, Stella and I are going to spend most of this episode discussing the rather wonderful and rarely talked about 2014 to 17 American TV series, The Stray.
Yay.
Remember, if you heard my recommendations from a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, I've recently finished watching the whole TV series. So, since I only really started watching that series as a result of Stella's episode last year about TV horror, I asked Stella if she'd like to talk about it on the podcast, and Stella said
yes.
And I was delighted. So we're going to talk about The Strain. Because we've both seen the whole series, it's going to be a spoiler-filled discussion. I think it's going to be really hard to avoid spoilers because it's a very eventful series. And there are specific ways in which each of the four series of The Strain are different to each other, and the characters are different and things. So I think it's going to be really difficult to talk about those without spoilers. So if you've never seen The Strain, go watch it. I think it's on Disney Plus in the UK. And yeah, it's all there, all four seasons. It's very entertaining. I mentioned it to a friend of mine a while ago. I introduced a friend to it. I said, just watch the pilot episode. If you're not hooked by the end of the pilot episode, I'd be very surprised.
Yeah.
And he messaged me back a few hours later saying it's brilliant. Brilliant.
Hunger, a poet once said, is the most important thing we know, the first lesson we learn. But hunger can be easily quieted down, easily satiated. There is another force, a different type of hunger, an unquenchable thirst that cannot be extinguished. Its very existence is what defines us, what makes us human. That force is love.
It's one of the best pilots, I think, in the whole sort of glut of TV drama that we've had over the past 10 years. I think it's one of the most interesting and drag you in pilots that there is. And, there is argument that it doesn't sustain that because it wasn't that well received. But I think as for a pilot, like you said, you can't watch the pilot and then go, it just won't let you. It's really, really fascinating pilot.
It's fantastic. And it's my only slight disappointment with the production of the series was that there was never another episode directed by Guillermo del Toro, who did direct the pilot based on, and also I think he co-wrote it, and he never wrote another episode either, although obviously the whole series is based on his novel.
It's on the novel, isn't it? Yeah, they did with, what's it called, Chuck Hogan. I've got it written right here.
Chuck Hogan, yeah.
Yeah, well, getting del Toro to sort of put his name to it and then to direct one episode. American telly's done it before, so they did it with what's his chops, Martin Scorsese and the Boardwalk Empire. So he directed the pilot, and everyone was like, "Oh, Martin Scorsese's doing a TV program. Where isn't this exciting?" And then he does the pilot, and then everyone swarms in for that, and then for the rest of the series, he just gets his name on it, but he doesn't have anything else to do with it. It's a strategy to go, oh, hey, look over here, look at this series, because we've got this eminent director working on it, but only for an hour and 20 minutes, and then they're buggering again. So it's a bit of a tactic to be heard above the noise. Yeah,
it's clearly effective, and it's kind of traditional in TV series that if the director who does the first episode is the one who sets the tone.
Yeah.
All the other directors who follow, their job is really to imitate the first director. So if your first director is someone great like Scorsese or Del Toro, then all the other directors have got to up their game. But in a way, that style has got to be followed if the series is doing its job. So even though the original director isn't technically seeing it all through, it hopefully feels as if they are. And I kind of think in this case it is. Okay, so before we get into the main discussion, let's just play a few clips from The Strain. And then final warning, folks, anyone who's not seen it yet, go away. and come back once you've seen it, because I think we're probably going to ruin it. So let's just have a listen to the series.
Throughout my life, I've learned what it feels to cross a line. That line, it has been crossed now.
Oh my God. It's every passenger.
They're all dead. No signs of trauma.
What is this?
Help me. I have seen this disease before. All the passengers, dead and alive. They must be destroyed.
So that was The Strain, and you will have heard there among others Corey Stoll, who plays the main character in The Strain, Dr. Ephraim Goodweather.
Yeah.
And I watched the pilot episode going, I don't know who that guy is, but he's okay. Then later on I realised, oh, it's the bad guy from Ant-Man.
Yeah.
he's the annoying bald bad guy in Ant-Man. And
well, you know when he shaves his head?
Yeah.
Like season 2, season 3?
It's mid-season 2.
Yeah, something like that. When with a shaved head, he looks dead ringer for my brother, and it was one of them things that once I noticed it, I just kept going,
Right.
It's like my brother. Yeah, really bugged me, like shape of his nose, like everything. Just like, oh, this is weird. Why is Nick in America parasitic vampires?
Oh, weird.
It's uncanny.
But, I just remember as soon as he went bald, I thought he was reminding me of the Ant-Man villain.
Yeah.
And I just wanted him to grow his hair back. Which first spoiler, he never quite grows his hair back. But
even in the midst of the world coming to the end of parasitic vampires, he finds time to shave his head.
That's true, he does, doesn't he? So, where to start with The Strain then? The first episode is called Night Zero.
Yay.
So, it's a great place to start, I suppose. And I love that title. And it's just such a gripping kind of opening that this plane flies into New York Airport. And there's some kind of monster on it. That whole sequence where they can hear like noises from the hold.
Oh, it's banging underneath, isn't it? Yeah.
Just terrifying. I've seen it twice, the pilot, and it scared the hell out of me both times. And then when the plane lands and everybody, or nearly everybody aboard is dead.
Yeah.
That's just so effective.
What do you think that is? Rustling of some sort?
Our experts think it's the engine shutting down or liquid settling.
How long between landing and shutdown?
6 minutes.
It's too short a window for a contagious event, so I think CDC should take a backseat on this one.
I agree.
Do you?
Absolutely, I do.
How often do you touch your face?
What?
In a day. How often?
I don't know. Once an hour?
Every 3 minutes. You have mouth-hand contact every 5 minutes. You touch somebody else every 20 minutes. That's how contagion works. You don't like terrorists? Try negotiating with a virus. A virus exists only to find a carrier and reproduce. That's all it does, and it does it quickly. It has no political views. It has no religious beliefs. It has no cultural hang-ups. And it has no respect for a badge. It has no concept of time or geography. It might as well be the Middle Ages, except for the convenience of hitching a ride on a metal tube flying from meal to meal to meal. That's how a plague begins. So you still want to be the first one through the door?
I said to you and Kirsty before when we talked about it briefly that it's basically Dracula, isn't it? It's the ship coming into Whitby and Dracula with everybody aboard dead.
Because the box is in it, isn't it? His big wooden box is in the plane.
Yes, his box of earth,
which
again is completely Dracula. But and although admittedly I find it less easy to accept that a plane could land itself. Although I think you're supposed to think that the pilot lands it under the telepathic control of the creature or something, but it never
master,
really goes into it. Yeah, and that detail pleased me because it's at least the second time we've had a major vampire baddie called the Master, going back to the first season of Buffy.
But
It's probably been used a lot. Stella, I feel like you've got stuff to say, and I keep talking over you.
It's just because I've got my one of the edits of my book chapter here where I talk about it. So you mentioned, and it just popped into my head. Oh yeah, I did write about that. With the box in the plane. So obviously it's very Dracula, but then there's other characters that mirror characters that we recognise from Dracula. So we've got Abraham Satrakian. He's the Holocaust survivor, history professor, and he's our Van Helsing, isn't he?
Yes.
With his sword and his cane, which I love. And then I sort of read, the rich tycoon, Eldritch Palmer. I read him as like the Renfield character because he's waiting for Dracula to come and save him and, save him from death. So he's our Renfield. So they're the two that I recognised as being clearly from Dracula. But then I also liked how it played with the Eastern European things that we would perhaps expect from a Dracula-based situation. So in calling them Strigoi, that's an Eastern European word, and you've got I think my favourite bit of it, of the sort of the vampire lore in the strain, was how they can still see themselves in the mirrors, but the image vibrates. I thought that was really nice. So rather than vampires just being invisible in mirrors, whenever they see themselves in a mirror, it's there, but it's just moving. And I was just like, oh, that's nice.
Wow,
really nice.
That's such a subtle detail that it went totally over my head.
You'll have to watch it again.
Yeah, well, I probably don't need too much persuading. I think there's loads of Dracula parallels, and I think there's probably a number of different Renfields throughout the series because you've got a number of human characters who can, or even, the interaction between humans and vampires in it is really interesting, even though they're not called vampires much. They are sometimes, but obviously you've got the word Strigoi, and you've got a very strong Eastern European thread through it because of both the character of Satrakian but also of Vasily Fett, the exterminator played by Kevin Durand. He's probably my favourite character.
Yeah, I reckon so.
He's great.
He gets the best lines, I reckon.
Yes, that's true. I say that there's a lot of strong characters in it, and we'll talk about all of them, hopefully. So at the very start of the series, you have Dr. Goodweather, who's clearly... Well, I think we're introduced to him in a marital counselling session. And he's on the verge of divorce. He has a son called Zach, whose life is obviously being blighted by the fact that his dad's never around. He's so absorbed in his work, and he is in fact having an affair, as we later discover.
With his colleague, isn't it? She's his colleague.
Yes, Nora, played by Mia Maestro, who is another CDC doctor. And for a while, the way that Zach and his mum, who's the actress is called Natalie. Oh no, I've lost it. Oh dear. I'm going to just look at Wikipedia because if I don't, I will feel utterly. Natalie Brown.
There she is.
Plays Kelly. F's estranged wife. Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff that goes on there because obviously, basically, the plot really gets going quickly in the first episode because, we have that brief kind of counselling session to establish the characters and the emotional relationships, but then immediately F is called to the site of the grounded plane. And so leaves that scene to go directly into the plot. And then from that point, you've got the jeopardy of the fact that there's clearly some danger spreading from this thing. And Kelly is separated. Zach kind of bounces around. And you're gradually getting to know more characters as you go through. And most of the main characters in the series, not all of them, but most of them are set up in that pilot as well. You know, you've got Sean Astin as the as kind of F's sidekick, who's being manipulated by. It's not by Palmer, is it? No, it is.
It is by Palmer. Yeah, he's kind of his bit of a lackey for him, isn't he?
Yeah.
We also meet the hacker.
Well, we do, although I think it's not for a couple of episodes.
No, is it not?
But,
I can't remember.
the hacker character played by the wonderful. Why am I blanking on names? She's got an amazing name as well, Ruta Gedmintas.
That's the one.
I'll be honest, Stella. Every time I saw her, I just thought of you.
Oh.
Yeah. She's just got this kind of slightly punky style. And I remember when we were talking about His Dark Materials, and I liked her in that. And you
she's Serafina, isn't she, of course?
Yeah. And you were there saying, yeah, she's in The Strain as well, so I was looking out for her. And,
see, all these things that I once knew. Just all gone.
Well, they're all gradually reviving within them. No, she's a fantastic character, although her name is Dutch Velders.
Yes.
And essentially, she starts off as a villain in a way, because she's the person who crashes the internet in New York, which kind of helps the strain, the plague of the Strigoi to spread, because people's communication is just made very slow and clunky. And I think that's another thing which is nice in the first season, because you get this sense of doom, that all these elements have been manipulated to make things as bad as possible. There's also, in the middle of the series, in an episode that is weirdly directed by Peter Weller, RoboCop himself, there's an eclipse that happens. So for a couple of days there isn't even a day. So suddenly there are just Strigoi everywhere. And I thought, oh my god, is this where it's going? Is the sun going to be blocked out for good?
Like this in The Simpsons.
Was it in The Simpsons?
Yeah, when Monty Burns... it's why Mr. Burns gets shot. Because he covers up the sun.
Oh, yes, that's right.
He puts a big metal umbrella thing up over Springfield. And... so that everyone will have to constantly buy electricity from the power plant. Anyway, irrelevant. Carry on.
But no, I thought that would be really good. I thought there's going to be some artificial way of blocking the sunlight, and that doesn't happen straight away in the series, but it does kind of come back. But just going back to Dutch, whose name is really interesting. They never really explain where she gets a name like that.
No.
And she's clearly English. Admittedly, the actress doesn't have an English-sounding name either. But I just think it's interesting that, because when someone says the name Dutch is the first name, I just think of Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator.
That's not what they're going for in The Strain, is it?
No, not really. So, so she's kind of employed by Eldritch Palmer at first, whose name is a reference to The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch by Philip K. Dick, and a novel I have not read,
but
neither. I just remember knowing the title and going, "Oh, I see what they did there." But it's also it's Lovecraft, isn't it? It's like Eldritch is the adjective that I think H.P. Lovecraft invented to describe things which were a bit preternatural or a bit strange. In some of his books, characters are described as having an eldritch look to them.
All right.
So you can, I think Lovecraft invented that word, and then Philip K. Dick appropriated it into a name, and then Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan just changed the words around to make it into a different name.
Well, I didn't know that.
Well, there we are. Yeah. So I have transferred some pointless information from my brain to your brain.
Yay.
So, Dutch is a really interesting character because she she starts off being very much a mercenary character. She's a computer hacker who basically agrees to crash New York's internet for money and only money. She's not concerned about anything else, but as she's brought together with the other heroic characters in the series, and she realises the chaos and the havoc that's been caused, she becomes a badass fighter against the Strigoi.
She does.
And she's got a great character arc, and there's loads of nice moments with her. So I think this is probably the first major spoiler. One of the things which slightly disappointed me is that the series kind of sets up a running personal conflict between her and the great villain, played by Richard Sammel, who is he's a Strigoi who is like the number 2 to the Master.
Yeah.
So he's kind of the face of villainy, because in a way the Master himself is rather an elusive villain.
Yeah, we don't see
too much of him. He switches bodies at different points. He's voiced by Robin Atkin Downes, which is a nice Buffy link as well.
Well, I thought that the effects on the Master when we do see him, I thought they were very sort of Buffy-ish. Anyway, I found some of the visual effects, well, some of them are quite disturbing. It's been very well done, but I found that some of the vampiric look sort of echoed Buffy a little bit, certainly all the long fingers and things like that, and the full facial prosthetics.
Well, they're both kind of drawing from Nosferatu, aren't they? And I like the fact that, I mean, and you see this in the first episode, or at least you get the sense of it. I don't think you see the Master's face, but you can tell from the way that he is shot that he's not just another actor. He's a big monster, voiced by Robin Atkin Downes when he speaks, but I don't think you even hear that voice in the first episode. In fact, you don't. Weirdly, the first episode has a credit which just says voice of Lance Henriksen. So I think Lance Henriksen was the original casting for the voice of the Master.
For the pilot.
But obviously he doesn't come back. But B, I can't even remember, and I've seen it twice, I can't remember a bit in the first episode where you hear the Master speak. It's... I'm
sort of trying to run the episode through in my head. Is there a bit of mastery mumbling? You know, the first vampiric kill that's not on the plane, that's by the wooden box, that's by his big box.
Where he kills the kind of superintendent of the airport.
Is there some sort of...
There's weird kind of mumbling.
Yeah,
but,
is that it, maybe?
But I find it odd that you get a relatively big name actor to do that.
Yeah, just come in and go, and then on your way, son. What?
Yeah, so that was weird. Also, did you know that John Hurt was the original actor who played Satrakian?
No, I didn't.
I was quite pleased when I found this out. Pleased and saddened, because I love David Bradley, who plays Satrakian in the pilot and the whole series. But when they first filmed the pilots, it was John Hurt, who had worked with Del Toro. He's in the Hellboy films, and probably some other things as well. He did film the whole pilot, but then he dropped out of the series. And they had to reshoot all of his scenes with David Bradley, who then played the role for the rest of the series. Well, I think it was, and this is my Doctor Who fan knowledge coming in here, through following his Doctor Who stuff, which he did for the last few years. I know when he started to fall ill, and it was about 2014. He was coming down with cancer, and he died in 2017. Yeah. So if he had carried on playing Satrakian, he probably wouldn't have survived through the whole series.
Yeah, I guess having to and fro from the States is not what you want when that's happening, is it? I suppose.
Yeah, and we should say as well, I think The Strain is entirely filmed in Canada.
I guess so. They all are, aren't they? It's cheaper.
But it's very clearly set in New York, or most of it is. And I think it's really well done. Yeah. I did find myself thinking, is this actually filmed in New York apart? Because it doesn't just look like generic city. it makes use of specific New York locations, and I mean, I'm sure they must have done some filming in New York, whether it was just like second unit bits or whatever. But it all hangs together really well. But yeah, so I would love to see John Hurt's take on that role. That footage does exist, but I don't know if it was ever
really
released.
interesting to see.
Yeah. But I do think David Bradley is fantastic as that character as well. Yeah, I mean, the casting throughout the show is really strong. But I suppose because I didn't know too much about The Strain before I watched the first episode, I wasn't really expecting to see actors I recognised. But, you know, you've got a number of British actors turning up who I know from British TV, like Rupert Penry-Jones, who comes into it as the good Strigoi later on, who's... I'm blanking on all the names, but he's got a really kind of prosaic name. He's called Quinlan, although it's kind of established that his origin was in Roman times, so he was known as Quintus then, but they all just call him Mr. Quinlan now.
Mr. Quinlan.
I think it's quite a fun name for
That's
a guy who's basically a hulking monster, even if he is rather an honestly spoken one. And then you got people like Samantha Mathis turning up, who I knew from rom-coms in the 90s, like Jack and Sarah with Richard E. Grant. And of course, Jonathan Hyde, who plays, I guess, the main on-screen villain for the first couple of series at least, Eldridge Palmer, doing his American accent, but he's a British actor.
The accent's not bad, to be fair. It's all
right. It's really good.
No.
I mean, I'm not American, so I'm not the best judge, but it didn't bother me at all. And there is a bit where you get to see a flashback with Jonathan Hyde acting with the actor who's supposed to be Palmer's father, who presumably is actually American. And there isn't a weird disconnect. It's they work as father and son in that scene.
Yeah. With this cast though, it seems crazy that not many other people have seen it, because whenever I've mentioned it to other people who like horror, everyone goes, no, I've not seen it. Like, what? Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I found it. I don't even remember how I found it. I found it while I was doing my PhD, but I didn't include it in my PhD. I wrote a paper on it, but why would I have done that? Because it wasn't connected to my PhD. I don't know why I found it or why I started watching it, but when I did start watching it, I was like, oh, it's vampire stuff, and it's got all these people in it that I recognise. Why is no one else watching it? And it did okay for FX. Like, it wasn't pulling in the numbers like American Horror Stories. You know, it wasn't that well regarded, but because FX decided, or they said to them, how many series is this going to take? And they said, it's going to take 3 series. And they said, right, okay, well, you can have it for 3 series. And then about halfway through the third, they went, including the owner of FX, John Landgraf, the channel executive, he said, are you going to need an extra season? And they said, yeah. And he was like, right, okay, 1 more season, then we're going to call it. So they knew from a fair way off the end that it was going to end. So because it was so finite, and they didn't have to keep dragging it out and worrying about future ratings, they were just... I think they let it fly with a lower rating and lower viewing figures than it would have done if it was going to be made indefinitely, if you see what I mean. Because they knew it was going to end. It was like, yeah, okay, we'll let that go, and we'll let it keep being made. Whereas other shows on FX that have had numbers like that and lower get, cancelled. But because it was given it will be this long, everyone said, well, okay then, off you go.
Right, okay. And I mean, this might relate as well to the fact that it's based on this trilogy of novels.
Yeah.
Did you say you'd had a go at reading them?
Yeah, I've got it in there. It's when you get a Christmas book and it's the big giant hardback.
Right.
It's one of those, and I read probably about 3/4 of it, and for some reason I just couldn't rustle up the arsedness to finish it, so I just never finished it. And so maybe when I did find the TV show, I was like, oh, I read that, or tried to read that, so I'll give the show a go. And then, like you said, the pilot, I was just like, oh, this is tons better. But they did want it to be. The book was kind of a second thing. So initially it was written for television.
Right.
And they couldn't find a channel to pick it up. So Del Toro and Chuck Hogan instead wrote it as a novel. They still wanted to develop it, so they turned it into a series of graphic novels. And then finally, in 2012, FX ordered a pilot, and then they aired the first series in 2014. So they'd been around the houses trying to get it to television.
Right.
Yeah.
And when by the time the TV series was made, had the all 3 books been released?
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure.
Sounds like they possibly had been.
Yeah, I think. From what I remember reading about it, I think it was, this is the story. It's this long. We'll need to do it in this much time. So they were able to take that pitch to FX and say, we need this many hours. What do you reckon? And FX at the time are going, yeah, we'll make everything. Woohoo! And so they did.
Wow. Yeah, I think that would have given them a sense of security, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
knowing
definitely.
That the beginning and middle and end were already there. And what I do like about the series is that probably because of that factor, there aren't really kind of pointless subplots in it that don't go anywhere. There's no real sense of we've got to keep this going for a certain amount of time. We don't really know what to do with this. Everything keeps moving.
Yeah, they don't need to spin it out, do they? It's just get on with it and tell the story, because we're gonna
and each of the 4 seasons builds to a climax as well, in a different way. It's not just they're just doing that thing again that they did last year, or that the Strain always does. It definitely feels like the series moves on. And in fact, I found it so exciting that the end of the first series is they trap the Master, and it looks like they're going to kill him, but then he manages to get away, and the rug is kind of pulled out from under them. But every season kind of builds up to some big confrontation like that.
To a big boss.
Or some big escape. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that. So, obviously we've not got time today to really go into detail on everything, but one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it was that I find it strange that not enough people are talking about it or have done. I mean, before we did this podcast, I just did a search to see if there are podcasts about the Strain, and there isn't one dedicated to the show. And there are very few, podcasts that have done random episodes just talking about it. In fact, I only found one, and that was reviewing the pilot episode back in 2014.
Right.
So it does seem like it just hasn't really made an impact that it should have done. And maybe it's because of the times that it's released in, and that people don't notice it because there's so much other content out there.
Well, with that, the channel executive, the FX executive, is called John Landgraf. He said in 2015, so there's this big sort of conference that they do in America, the Television Critics Association conference thing, where all the execs and people get together and talk about, I don't know how great they all are, I suppose. But in 2015, Landgraf said, we're living in the age of peak TV. So he's like, there's so much content. It's really hard for viewers to find what they want. It's really hard for programs to get noticed, and he wrote something like, I can't remember the exact figures, but it was something around the figure of, like in 2010 there was about 200 dramas on air in America. By 2015 they had more than doubled. It was like there's just so much content, and then with Netflix and everybody else piling on, so Landgraf said it was peak TV. And a couple of years later he kind of went back on that and said, I said it was peak TV in 2015. Well, I think I lied, and I think what we're actually looking at is not even a golden age, but a gilded age of TV, and at some point, this bubble's got to burst. So he's still banging on about it, and people kind of listen to what he says about the industry, because he does know what he's talking about. But in terms of the Strain kind of getting a bit lost, I think it is because, one, in terms of peak TV, there was so much drama, but also in 2014 and 2015, in the cycle of TV horror that sort of kicked off after The Walking Dead, 2015 was the peak year for that. So in 2015 alone, there was like 9 new horror dramas launched, and there was already 20 odd on air. which, you know, in the years before The Walking Dead, there was maybe 1-2 horror dramas on air, and I mean not on air in America. So I guess The Strain was part of that cycle, but it did kind of get swallowed up, and, you know, kind of answers my own question from earlier. But that's why it kind of flew under the radar a little bit, because there was just so much going on, not just in terms of horror drama, but in terms of long form, expensive drama. Anyway.
Yeah. And the whole series does feel very post-Walking Dead. I mean, we've obviously established that, but I really like the kind of it's not post-apocalyptic, but it's kind of moving towards the apocalypse. It's a really nice.
It's in the post, isn't it? All the way through. Yeah,
there's a feeling of humanity being overwhelmed in it, and I think we should talk about the Strigoi themselves. What do you think of that design? It's very Guillermo del Toro, isn't it? It reminded me of the, do you remember the kind of ultra vampires from Blade 2? The vampires that feed on all the vampires, the way they have this kind of horrible maw that opens up and the kind of sucker comes out to grab people by. So the Strigoi and the Strainer are a bit similar to that, with their horrible tongue that can leap out of their mouth for 2 meters. And
I think I called it, I'm looking at this again, I think I decided to call it a stinger. So I think at some point in there it's called a stinger, isn't it? So I was like, so I remember writing it and being like, what, whip, neck, snake, like what is this? But yeah, stinger's the right way. And I think so it leaves like a slit in the throat, doesn't it? A vertical slit, and then when the vampires are hungry, it kind of opens up and the stinger whips out and grabs the victim by the neck. Sort of the rubbery prosthetic on the neck was very, very Del Toro. It was, put me in mind of Pan's Labyrinth and Kronos and things like that, his other films. But I think the thing that I liked about the Strigoi the most is, one, the stinger's quite nice, and because they're parasitic, they give you vampire worms essentially, which is a bit gross.
And I like the fact that, I think you'll agree with me here, Stella, Del Toro has always been keen on he loves his monsters and he loves his vampires.
That's the key word.
But they are, it's kind of, there's always something a bit gross, and it's like he really, I mean, there's so much vampire fiction which plays on the kind of eroticism and stuff.
Yeah, it was so refreshing to have monstrous vampires.
He's designing it in such a way that you can't forget that this is like a parasitic creature. It's not a handsome man who gives you a kiss. You actually sort of see the gross, gooey, infectious side
worms.
Of it. Yeah.
Well, so we have to mention then, Gabriel in the first season. So Gabriel is the rock star.
Yes.
The long-haired rock star. So like you said, unlike other vampires, they're not sexy, they're not romantic, and they're not troubled and lovesick and all that kind of.
I think I know the scene you're going to talk about here. Bolivar, he's called, isn't he?
Stickers that come out of the mouth. Yeah. And the episode is called Gone Smooth.
That went over my head as well. That's another one.
Gabriel, he's one of the ones on the plane, isn't he?
Yeah, he's one of the 4 survivors.
He's slowly turning into a Strigoi, and you sort of through the way he is and through his rock star persona, he's obviously used to having, enjoying the perks of a besotted female, fandom. But in episode 1.3, Gone Smooth, he finds that his libido's gone, and that's kind of compounded by his genitals just fall off and land in the toilet water, and he just goes and shrugs and pushes it away. And I remember just watching that and being like, this isn't in fucking Twilight, is it?
Yeah, that's amazing.
So good. It's called Gone Smooth or that. Yeah, well done.
They make key play out of the fact that the creatures have a cloaca rather than 2 sets of I was going to say 2 sets of genitals, but you know what I mean. Two different delivery systems for their. It all goes like birds or whatever. it all goes through one opening. So you have no need for that particular appendage.
For that appendage,
bye.
It just
Flush
goes
you away.
tunk into the toilet water, and it's his shrug.
Yeah, with a comedy sound effect. Yeah. Bolivar is a great character as well because as a human, he's just fun because he's basically he's a rock star, but he's a faker. He's got that big
it's a wig,
goth
isn't it?
hair. Yeah, that is a wig that he takes off and he puts on this persona to in order to enjoy, like you say, the perks, the indulgences of his position. He doesn't really care about the music or anything like that.
No, he doesn't.
But then, as he becomes an actual Strigoi, he becomes quite a formidable villain. And later in the series, he actually becomes the host to the Master, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So there's loads for him to do. He's cool. And so we've mentioned, apart from Dutch, we've only really talked about the male characters, and I think that the series does have quite a good array of female characters as well. My slight problem, and again slight disappointment, is that he doesn't necessarily use them all very well. So in the first couple of seasons, the main female character is Nora, played by Mia Maestro, who's fantastic. And Kirsty's not here, so I should say she's in Hannibal as well, which I was very pleased to see. Then at the end of season 2, though, she's killed off, or she gets infected, kills herself, in a very effective scene, and it's emotionally powerful because, particularly, you've seen how she's tried to step into the role of being Zach's mum, kind of tentatively. She's trying to build a rapport with him, and she sort of half got there, but ultimately. She dies mainly because, it's a confrontation with Kelly, who's become a Strigoi by that point, and Zach still has loyalty to his mum, and doesn't want to see Nora kill his mum, so he kind of distracts her for half a second, which is all it takes. She would have had Kelly's head off with her sword at that point, but at the same time, there's been a really nice subplot in the second series, which is Eldritch Palmer's relationship with his new aide, PA, I suppose,
the PA,
who's called Coco.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating kind of political, stroke romantic, stroke professional relationship between them because. She obviously reinvigorates him to some extent. She makes him stand up to the Master, but she's almost killed, but then kind of brought back to life by the Master, which is an interesting twist, because I was glad they didn't get rid of her straight away. But then at the end of season 2, they do just get rid of her anyway. Essentially, in plot terms, she's killed by the Master to remind Palmer who's boss.
Who's boss, yeah.
But also it kind of gives Palmer the motivation to kind of follow through on the seed of betraying the Master, which builds up over the next couple of series. So it's a kind of classic fridging of the female character. And do you remember I talked about on the podcast when I just watched the first series how the second series, I started watching it threw me off because they'd recast Zach with an older looking actor.
Yeah, he suddenly jumps up to being about 14.
Yeah. I got used to that, but ending the second series on that kind of double fridging was a bit like, It was a similar kind of knock which made me not want to watch the rest of the series. I did, though, but it took a while. There's another weird jump or weird disconnect that happened for me. At the start of the third series, there's a bit of narration from Satrakian where he says something like, "It has been 23 days since the plane landed in New York and started this plague." And I thought, 23 days? That's less than the number of episodes we've watched. Are you sure?
He's old. He's just...
Well, yeah. But, unfortunately, because I did just try and ignore that he said that, but then later in the series, there's a few other references to the fact that it's only been basically 3 weeks, and I thought, surely it's been a few months. It feels like
it's changed season and everything. It's better now.
So that was, well, that's a plot hole basically.
Yeah.
But there's no kind of getting around it. But then between the third and the fourth series, there's another time jump of like a year. So that kind of all moved on from there. And unfortunately, by the third season, we've got rid of all the good female characters apart from Dutch. Because I think Samantha Mathis's character is my other favourite character. She plays councilwoman Justine Feraldo.
She's good. She's a prickly. I like her.
She's great. She gets things done.
She does.
Yeah, she's cool. She's like not the mayor, but the head of the council on Staten Island.
Yeah.
We're going to be careful not to sound like we're talking about what we do in the shadows here, but and she gets kind of recruited by the mayor of New York to take over the fight against the Strigoi there, and she's a really great character, I think. But again, she's kind of got rid of. Although I was pleased that in the fourth season they introduce a new female character played by Rona Mitra, who is the lead in the one Underworld movie that doesn't have Kate Beckinsale in it. Which I don't
think I've seen any of them.
I've only seen the first one. I think she's the lead in Underworld Rise of the Lycans. But anyway, she plays the character who's Fett's new girlfriend stroke. Cohort. And I was really pleased that they didn't just kill her off. I was kind of expecting it to happen at any point. But it doesn't. And just the last few episodes where all the different threads kind of come together, very exciting. And you get Ike Horse, the villain played by Richard Sammel, who I think is just a wonderful, hateful villain. He's exactly what you want from a villain, which is very entertaining to watch, but you also hate him. I mean, he repeatedly abuses Dutch in different ways throughout the series, and I really like the fact that they kind of seeded in that she keeps getting her own back in little ways. Like there's one bit where she chops his hand off.
Yeah.
So, it's like incrementally she gets revenge, but ultimately she's not the person who brings him down. That's Satrakian. And I didn't know whether to be disappointed by that or not. I wanted to see more of Dutch's vengeance, but on the other hand, Satrakian is the character who's been in conflict with this guy for like 70 years.
Yeah, he needs to finish it, doesn't he?
And I have to say that the scene where Satrakian defeats Eichhorst by allowing Eichhorst to feed on him when he's just necked a load of warfarin.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's my favourite scene in the series. I just kept rewinding that and watching it again. Because that wonderful speech that David Bradley really drives home. Like rats, you cannot vomit the blood thinner. He's got this lovely little delivery where he goes, an anatomical curiosity, no doubt, but very significant too, don't you think?
It's like he's in the room.
No, I just watched that over and over again. And that happens a few episodes before the end. But for me, that was kind of the climax of the series, because the kind of thread of it is really that enmity between those two characters.
After that, they're just kind of tidying up, aren't they? So it can end nicely.
Yeah. What did you think of the ending?
Well,
do you remember how you felt?
Relieved, because then I could write about it and move on.
Right. Well, that's an honest answer.
Yeah. They said, right, are we done? Right, go.
Yeah, we should say that the last couple of seasons are a few episodes shorter than the earlier ones, which may have been part of the plan.
I enjoyed the change in the title sequence. Was it in the third season where it goes like a comic book?
That happens, but it's only for one episode, or at least that's the way it appears on the Disney Plus ones. Maybe they've.
I
felt like I thought that episode was running short, they needed like a minute of extra time, and it's like, can somebody do us some cheap animation?
Yeah. Can anyone draw? Can anyone in here draw?
And they just used it the once, and yeah. So
maybe I noted that down somewhere, but it didn't make the cut.
Right. But yeah, it does come to a broadly satisfying ending, I think. Although I think I'm slightly disappointed because they end it by basically nuking the Master, don't they? And they trick him into staying in this place where they've got the nuke. But he doesn't know that it's happening. There isn't a moment where he turns and sees the bomb about to go off and goes, oh! And you want him to know that he's been defeated. But instead he's just kind of blissfully thinking he's won when the bomb goes off and the bomb is activated by Zack. Who there's a really nice kind of back and forth across the last season where you're not sure if Zack is going to is completely enthralled to the Master or if he's going to go back to the human side, and they keep that kind of uncertainty going really well, I think. But then in the last episode, I'm not entirely sure that they adequately set up that Zack's real loyalties are to the human race, because ultimately it's Zack and his betrayal of the Master which causes the Master to be defeated, and that kind of made me go, eh? But on the other hand, you get to have a Dutch and Fett living happily ever after.
I know.
And that was sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been weird watching the whole series from the vantage point of the pandemic as well, because obviously it is essentially about a viral outbreak. There's lots of familiar imagery and ideas
stuff
in it. Yeah, the whole sequence in the first episode where there's that coroner who kind of finds the worms in the bodies, and then he tries not to get them on himself, and he's trying to get his rubber
into his hand.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
That's a really good scene. Yeah,
and obviously he comes back a few episodes later, having turned into a Strigoi, which is really good as well.
Well, speaking of worms,
oh yeah,
like you do.
Yes, we do.
The Strain and Del Toro and the channel exec Landgraf, they got their wrists more than slapped because the billboard posters to advertise the Strain was the eye being pulled down with a worm coming out of it.
Yeah.
And people went nuts, and they were like, you cannot have that poster. It's like, it's disgusting. My children are seeing it on the way to school and they're crying. Like loads and loads of tweets to Del Toro and to FX and to the Strain, all saying, things like, you're trying to make me crash and die. That's disgusting. Take it down. So they got proper bollocked. But Del Toro and John Landgraf both responded by going, yeah, well, all publicity is good publicity. I think we scared some people, but never mind. And they took some of them down, but they didn't take all of them down. So they did get in a bit of trouble for the poster. And it's have a bit in a lecture to show the students the poster and say that, what do you think? And it's always half and half. Like, some of them just go, no, it's fine, or the rest go, no, it's take it down. Like, don't want to look at it because it's it's just a close up on the eye. And the poster that they changed it to was like a side on view of a more sort of detailed version of one of the vampires with the stinger coming out of the mouth.
Oh yeah.
And then the stinger makes up the S of the Strain, and it was like, that's just as monstrous. But I think it was the worm in the eyeball was a bit too much for people's morning commute.
It's too close to real life as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the Strigoi is basically a big monster, but we can all have eye infections.
Yeah.
I think that poster is really effective. Yes, exactly. I think it's a great poster, and I think that for a piece of horror imagery, you should be reaching for something which makes people uncomfortable. But is also kind of weirdly beautiful. That's what that is. So, but I can understand why there were complaints as well. what else is there to say that I've not said, or that you've not said? I mean, there's loads, obviously, but in terms of this episode,
it's a good combination of stuff. It's a solid vampire drama, but it's also a solid procedural as well, because it hybridizes those two together. And I like how the science procedural elements sort of cut through the folklore stuff, so it's never too heavy on the we must do it like this, the light of the moon, and it's never too much of that. You get the really clinical procedural things, and like when you've got the letters that appear on screen to tell you where you are at the establishing shots, and it'd be like taxiway Foxtrot, I've got one written here, and then Poland 1994, and they sort of slam up onto the screen like they're being typed, like what you'd get in a CSI or something like that. And I found the squishing of those two together really nice, and so I've got them written here in my notes. So at times it feels a bit like CSI Transylvania, but it's an important moment in the development of the TV vampire, because it moves away from the lovesick, troubled TV vampire that we had a bit of in Buffy, and then we certainly had in True Blood. No matter how monstrous they wanted those vampires to be, they were still all really beautiful. So all you can do is stick fangs on them. Whereas in The Strain, like we said before, it's refreshing for a TV vampire to be this monstrous, and then to place it inside the framework of a procedural, and then have the folklore sort of supporting it all. I think it's just really, really well put together. Yeah, that is really nice. And the fact that it has the feel of a thriller, like a real world thing, because they put so much effort into the biological warfare and the disease control side of things. But also you've got these flashbacks which kind of link in the folklore, and I love the background of the character who was the original host of the Master and all that. We're running out of time, so I don't have time to go into that. But I just want to say, and my final thought for it is, I think it's cool that there's such a strong Hispanic element in it because of Del Toro's involvement. I guess you've got characters who speak Spanish a lot in the series with subtitles. That's really cool and gives it a kind of modern, kind of down to earth naturalism. Although it does make it weird when you have flashbacks, because no matter where the flashback is, whether it's 1944 Poland or whether it's the Roman Empire or whatever, they're all speaking English, often with English accents. Certainly in like the Roman sequences, And you just kind of have to accept that disconnect, I suppose. But I do appreciate the fact that, I mean, the character played by Joaquin Cosio, who's the former Mexican wrestler guy who was a film star called Angel. About that bit as well. he hardly ever speaks English at all. That's great. He's a fantastic character as well. So much of it I've just forgotten. But if you like vampires, give it a look. Yeah, and I would say, and if you like kind of, if you like The Walking Dead, then I would recommend The Strain. Yeah. If you like a compressed narrative that takes you to the edge of the end of the world rather than being kind of post-apocalyptic, then it very effectively does that. So, Stella, I could go on about this for a long time, but we're running out of time. So, we're going to do two things before the end of the episode. You and I will be back in a few minutes to do our recommendations, but right now the listener gets to hear Howard and I talking about a movie from the Bag of Death, because we haven't done this for a few weeks. So let's just go over to that, and then we'll be back.
Hello, Howard.
Hello, Dan, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very, very excited, as I always am at this time. How are you?
I'm equally excited.
Excellent.
Oh, damn it, time.
Bless you, sir. Well, I have the Bag of Death ready. I am rustling it now. We never know what will come out of this. It could be any English language horror film that you and I have both seen over the course of our random and intersecting lives. Let's see what this is. I have something. I'm unfurling it, and it says The Night Caller.
Oh, you mean yes. Ah, yeah. Now, I watched this recently, so...
Well, so did I, actually. I found it on an old VHS and I decided to have a look again, so I'm glad that's come out. So, The Nightcaller is a black and white science fiction thriller, sort of horror. Well, I wouldn't say it's a horror movie, really, but it is a little bit horrific in places. It was made in Britain in 1965, I think. Directed by John Gilling, who went on to do a number of Hammer films. It's not a Hammer film. It's produced, I think, by Mersham Park Productions. Is it? Or Merton?
Park did all the kind of like those second features, all those Edgar Wallace films, and Scotland Yard and all those. I think they did all those kind of.
Did they do Invasion?
They might have done, yes. Invasion is a very similar kind of film to The Nightcaller.
So yeah, it's a very low budget science fiction piece, and it's very much in the mode and style of Hammer's Quatermass films. The plot, essentially, I'll sum it up like this: there used to be, you remember Steve Pont and Hugh Dennis? Of course you do. They've never gone away. These days, presenters of Radio 4's comedy series The Now Show, if that's even still on, or am I terribly out of touch? I don't know. But anyway, in their 90s TV sketch comedy series, which I think was called the imaginatively titled Punt and Dennis Show, they had a character who was a displaced alien who would try and chat. He was a character who would try to chat women up in bars by claiming to be a displaced alien. Whether he was or not, I don't know, but his chat-up line was essentially, "My planet is dying. Please come with me and accompany me back to my homeworld for interplanetary breeding purposes."
Yes.
And that's essentially the plot of The Nightcaller.
An alien comes to take women back to his home planet to continue the species. So they must have... See, I've always wondered about that. You've got to have the same kind of anatomy, haven't you?
Well, it's all a little bit vague about exactly how...
if you're going to breed that way...
Yeah, well, he is a male and he's only collecting women.
Yes.
So, oh dear. I think before we get into that, let's sketch in the film a bit, because I think we can be fairly confident that many of our listeners won't have seen this movie and don't know about it. So it's a film of two halves, really.
Definitely.
The first half is set on a British army base, and basically a mysterious artificial satellite has fallen to Earth, and the army capture it, and a scientific team which I think is composed of Maurice Denham, John Saxon and Patricia Haynes.
Patricia Haynes, yeah.
Yeah, that they begin experimenting on this device, which is like a football-sized sphere, to see what it might be in it. And they gradually come to the conclusion. I think the army suspects that it's a new weapon that maybe has been launched by the Russians or something. But the scientists become convinced that it's actually of extraterrestrial origin, although they don't really tell their bosses this because they don't think they'd be believed. The general in charge of the base is played by John Carson. John Saxon is
one of my favourite actors. John Carson.
He's really good, and it's a wonderful role. Although he's basically playing the Brigadier from Doctor Who in this movie.
Slightly hapless but kind of likeable military officers who don't really know what's going on. They're trying to sort of maintain their equilibrium, but kind of like they don't really understand what's actually happening and stuff. But he's really good, yes.
Yes, and his sergeant is played by Jack Watson, who
another actor
played similar roles in movies like The Wild Geese.
Yes, and the Sea Wolves and all that stuff. There's lots of really good actors in this film.
Yeah.
It's a low film. There's lots of really good actors. That's what I should say. There's lots of really good actors and Aubrey Morris.
True, Aubrey Morris is in it, and it's not his finest hour, although I get the impression, Howard, you don't love Aubrey Morris, because we mentioned him on the Blood from the Mummy's Tomb.
He's not one of my favourites. Well, he's alright in things. He just seems to be hamming it up all the time. The most I've seen him in, he's sort of just that strange voice that he does all the time, like in the Blood from the Mummy's Tomb. That sort of.
Yeah, I think if he's in the right kind of production, like when he's in The Wicker Man, and he's talking to Edward Woodward, and there's that piece of skin hanging on a tree, and Woodward says, "What's that?" And he goes, "The poor wee lassie's navel skin. Where else should it be but hanging on her own little tree?" Playing that kind of character and saying those kind of lines, he's okay.
It's just, I don't know, it's not one of my favourites. I just find, because everybody else is kind of underplaying it and playing it for real, and there's somebody, it's like he's hamming it up because he feels that's what you have to do in that sort of film.
Well, so let's contextualise that and say that he's in the second half of the film, which is very different. So basically, without kind of giving away what happens, because it's quite a short film actually as well, and it's in a way it's quite discreet in its composition. I think it was based on a novel, but it mustn't have been a very long novel. So this thing that's fallen from space does in fact contain an alien, and following the first half of the film, the alien assumes human form and goes into London, and you then the film kind of flashes forward a few weeks and you don't see it, but apparently there've been a number of women going missing, so there's a criminal investigation going on, and the character played by John Saxon is now advising this investigation, and he thinks that this alien character may be involved, and he's trying to get the police to believe him. And a word for John Saxon, I suppose the fact that he's in it puts it in with those kind of British horror movies of the 50s and 60s that had to have an American lead, or felt that but he's very good, and I don't think it really trades off the fact that he's American. I think he kind of is so subtle in it. I wonder if he's sort of trying to do an English accent. He sounds like...
Trying to do an English accent, and it does sound like... See, I kind of think John Saxon, unlike some of the other actors in those science fiction films, I think John Saxon really gets it. He kind of understands what this film is. And he's kind of playing it for real. And he's really... I mean, he died last year. Did you know?
No, I didn't know. Oh, what a shame.
Yeah.
Because, of course, he went on to play Nancy's father in Nightmare on Elm Street. And he's also in Black Christmas, isn't he? He's in a few significant later horror genre films.
I think he gets a genre. I think he kind of understands what he's talking about. You get the feeling sometimes Brian Donlevy doesn't really know actually what he's saying, or doesn't really quite feel very comfortable in that kind of film. But I think John Saxon really does. He's really into it, and but first of all, I do like this film partly because there's a wonderful jazz theme music at the beginning.
There is, yes.
Johnny Dankworth. Is it by Johnny Dankworth?
It's not like Johnny Dankworth. I can't remember the name of the composer.
But it's like, it doesn't sound like a kind of sci-fi movie. It sounds like some film about social realism film about people living in Bayswater or something in the 60s. It's kind of very jazzy and it's great. And also I have to say that the version I saw on Talking Pictures was in colour. It had been colourised.
Oh, right. Okay.
So black and white, which does kind of change the mood of it. So then you've got that kind of very Quatermassy first half of the film, where there's this alien object, this sphere, and they're trying to understand it, and and Patricia Haynes is in the room, and suddenly there's these strange noises, and an alien hand comes around the door, and all this sort of thing, all very Quatermassy and all very kind of like scary. And then the creature kind of comes to life and escapes from this laboratory or whatever they are. And then suddenly there's this complete volte-face, this complete change, and then the next thing you're in London weeks later, where women are being, disappearing, and it's like kind of, you're watching it for the first time, you think, well, what's happened? Where are we? Why kind of there's been sort of like nothing in between, and then it turns out, and doesn't the alien kind of present himself as a magazine editor or something?
He puts adverts. He somehow arranges for adverts to be placed in fashion magazines, and he wants models, and then he sets up interviews with the applicants, and when they come to see him, that's when they are abducted. And I think he does this from like various offices that he hires for the purpose. How he's been able to do this is not really explained.
I think it's absolutely wonderful. I think that's what I like about it. It's so kind of kind of quaint, or what, that instead of just kidnapping these women, grabbing them and taking them off to a spaceship, he's actually sort of like putting adverts in magazines and setting up interviews, and there you go. And it's kind of like, what a, it's, you know, I think an alien from another planet is doing all this kind of like. But no, I think it's really imaginative. I think it's really ingenious. I think it's really well made, really well directed. It's got people like Warren Mitchell and Alfred Burke and all these kind of actors in it. Marion Stone, who was in loads and loads of films. I think Maurice Denham is always great, and Patricia Haynes is really good, and John Saxon, like I say, is terrific. The acting is really good. It's a really kind of like, of all those sci-fi films that came out in the 60s in Britain, things like Unearthly Stranger and Invasion and one or two others, I think it's one of my favourites, just because I think it's really well done, but at the same time it's quite wacky.
It is really well done. It's really well acted. I want to note that it's beautifully photographed by Stephen Dade, who 1 year earlier than this had shot Zulu, which I recently rewatched, and I think is possibly the most beautifully photographed film ever made. But that was right at the end of his career. He was a really distinguished kind of low budget. Well, I say distinguished, he was not really known. He's one of those people who'd made kind of hundreds of low-budget British quickies, and then he'd kind of got Zulu, so that was quite prestigious. And then after that, he only did a couple more films, and then he retired. His last film was a Hammer film called The Viking Queen, which was in 1967, which I also watched recently, and which is fun nonsense.
Not very good.
It's not very good in any sense, but I enjoyed it. And I mean, it's a Hammer attempt at a historical epic. It's not a horror film, and it's got some great actors in it. But it's the kind of movie that basically tries to convince you that Boudica was an Italian model.
Yeah.
So it's well. Maybe it's a side to history that we've not quite seen before, but no. He had great mastery of the camera, and you know the Nightcaller looks very slick. When the action shifts to London, there's some really nice kind of reportage style photography of just people in the streets of London at night, which looks like they've just gone out into the streets and filmed real people and real locations, and it's got a real kind of swinging London vibe to it.
Very kind of jazzy, kind of cool, kind of laid back feeling to it.
Yeah,
you know, it's sophisticated in a way. I just kind of think this is a really clever film, and it's really kind of stylish, and the ending I think is really interesting as well.
Well, the ending is basically where my problems with it start. Go on, though. Why do you think it's interesting without spoiling it for people?
Well, without spoiling it, it's I just think it's quite an ambivalent ending.
Well, I'll try and also avoid spoiling it, but I will just say when it comes to the ending, I felt like it kind of acts like maybe the alien isn't supposed to be as evil as we thought. However, he has abducted loads of innocent women, and the film gives us absolutely no indication that they're going to come back. And the film kind of acts like that's okay, maybe. And I think that.
Well, it does. I mean, it's just kind of it's ambivalent. It doesn't make a kind of judgment either way. It's like, well, are these women going to come back? Is he going to come back, or what's going to happen? And it's kind of like, I suppose some people would find that unsatisfactory, that nothing's really resolved and he just whatever gets away. But I kind of think, well, in most sci-fi films, the alien is destroyed and everything, it's all back to normal. And in this one, no, there's something. He is kidnapped these women, and it's and he's kind of got away with it, kind of thing. You know, they are on another planet, and
yeah, I like that ambiguity. I just think it's. I suppose because the way the story is structured, we don't see most of the women who are abducted. I think we see 2 possible abductions, one of which succeeds, and one woman who gets away. So therefore, we don't feel a huge sense of loss at all these women who've been taken away, and therefore maybe the film feels that it's able to play that down. But I'm not sure you can really say that all these... I mean, it's not like they've been killed, but it does strongly suggest they're probably never coming back, and we don't really know what's happened to them. And it's not that you can't have an ambiguous ending about that kind of thing, but I think that maybe just because it's a low budget film and they didn't have a great amount of running time to play with, I feel like we should be given a little... The characters in the movie should have a little longer to process what happened and think about that kind of thing.
Perhaps, yeah, but I mean, when it ended, I did kind of think, well, what about those poor girls? I did kind of think, well, that's... that's what I mean. It was kind of like it wasn't. There was something a little bit disquieting about it. It wasn't all resolved, and it wasn't all comfortable. And like in a lot of sci-fi films of that time, we're now so used to the downbeat ending. Every horror film now has a downbeat ending. Every film has a twist. The baddies always get away with it. So, but back then, perhaps it was more unusual to sort of kind of. And some people would argue. I mean, that's kind of, in a way, part of the film's sophistication, in a way, that it's not having that traditional ending, that is being quite sort of ambiguous and ambivalent on what's going to happen, and John Saxon's just kind of standing there at the end talking, and perhaps it's challenging the audience perhaps a bit to sort of, and here's an alien who's kind of, his race is dying, so does he think he has to do this?
Yeah.
In order to would we do the same thing if we were dying and were able to kidnap women from another planet? I mean, kind of...
I mean, maybe the film is bettered or improved by the fact that it doesn't hammer these things down your throats, these kind of moral issues. It just kind of shows what's happening and then leaves you to think about it as the audience. Maybe that's to its strength.
Yes. I just thought... The first time I saw the film, I thought the ending was problematic or unsatisfying. But when I watched it again, I thought, no, that's deliberate. They want you to feel slightly unsettled by it and what's happened, and I think it's all kind of part of what the film is. That it's kind of like a cool film.
Yeah, it is. Well, without spoiling who this happens to, there are a couple of deaths in the movie where A, you're not really expecting it, and secondly, the movie, as I said, secondly, you're not really expecting it, and B, the movie is quite matter-of-fact about the fact that this person is now dead, and the story just moves on.
Yes, yeah.
And seeing as we did bring him up, we should mention that Aubrey Morris is in the second half of the story, and doesn't he play like a slightly sleazy library owner who may be a link to the alien?
Yeah.
And therefore the police go and talk to him, and he's kind of known to the police, and he's a little bit of a maybe sort of furtive gay stereotype kind of character that the police don't like. And I can't remember if he has any direct connection to the action, but he's kind of a link, and he's a bit shifty. And yeah, there's just a couple of scenes with Aubrey Morris kind of being interrogated and being not very helpful, really, but also being spineless.
Yes. Yeah. I just find it a fascinating film for all sorts of reasons. It's fascinating that you've got these two halves which seem quite different. It's like two different stories or whatever, and you've got this really good cast, and I just find it kind of like it's so much, I don't know what the word, kind of like just a bit more sophisticated than the normal, a bit kind of, I don't know, a bit more laid back and a bit more kind of interesting and a bit more kind of...
No, it does do its own thing. It's not very formulaic. And it's got a sense of its own style as well. So, that definitely is to its credit.
A bit more subtle, I suppose, is what I'm trying to
say.
A bit kind of... than the usual thing.
And feels kind of very much like it could almost happen in the real world. Like there's a scene where a couple are interviewed who were witness. I think their daughter was one of the women who's gone missing. And the way that scene goes, and they're just trying to remember where they were, and the wife goes says, "Oh, it was a Thursday because you're always home on Thursday. It's your snooker night on Wednesday, but you were definitely home," or something like that, you know. And they're kind of having little bickering about who remembers which details, and it just feels really natural. But it also feels kind of very Coronation Street, kind of 1960s social realism kind of drama.
Yeah, well, isn't that Warren Mitchell who plays that part?
Warren Mitchell is the man, yeah. I can't remember the actress who's the wife.
Stone is the actress.
Who is it, sorry?
Marion Stone.
Oh, that's Marion Stone, okay.
That's it. And again, they're kind of people not really... Although Warren Mitchell was in a few horror films, he's not really associated with the genre. He's Afghan and stuff, so it feels more real because they're not... You know, he's associated with a more, you know, everyday kind of...
Yeah. So
yeah, all in all, I think it's definitely worth watching. I really like that. I watched it again recently because I was on Talking Pictures, and I thought this is really good. This is really clever. It's smart.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh well, if it's on Talking Pictures, that's good. I dug out my VHS, which was recorded off a late night ITV transmission about the year 2000. So I'm glad to know it's still knocking around. I've actually no idea if it's on DVD or anything like that. But I think the listeners should keep an eye on the Talking Pictures schedules because it will probably come around again.
Yeah, it's good. It's definitely worth watching. Definitely worth watching. It's a good one.
Nice one. Thank you, Howard. That's been another bag of death.
It has. How marvellous.
See you soon.
See you. Bye-bye.
So, that was me and Howard talking about another movie from the Bag of Death. And welcome back, Howard. We're going to try and keep that up every week from now on, if we can. So, we've just got a couple of minutes left, Stella, so it's recommendations. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a recommendation. It's more of a notification.
Okay. Is this another thing you haven't actually seen?
I've seen an episode and a half.
Right.
It's the serialised I Know What You Did Last Summer.
I knew you were going to say that. I didn't even know about it until the advert came up on my Amazon feed the other day.
Yeah, so I've watched... There's about 10 minutes left of the second episode, so I'm pointing over there because my television's over there.
Right.
I was watching before we did this, and it's... all I can say at this stage is I'm going to carry on watching it. Like, I've not watched the first one and gone, no. So, yeah, I'm going to carry on watching it. So, not necessarily a recommendation at this stage, more of a notification, and I might turn it into a recommendation when I watch
I'd like to hear from you what you think, because I've yet to be really convinced by the idea of long-form slashers, with the exception of Scream Queens, but that was kind of more of a comedy. But I'm slightly intrigued. I was also slightly intrigued by the weird poster, which is all the characters looking pretty like they're meant to do.
Yeah.
But with what looks like spaghetti bolognese on their faces. I think it's supposed to be blood, but they're all kind of flecked with matter.
Maybe they were all trying to feed a toddler.
Yes, it's got that kind of hint to it. And my recommendation is on Friday nights on Talking Pictures TV, which is on Freeview in the UK. They've got a thing now called Cellar Club. And Stella, you should point your students towards this if you didn't know about it. So it's basically every week I think they have at least a double bill, sometimes a triple bill of kind of 50s or 60s B movies or film noir. So there's often a Hammer film in there. There's sometimes a Roger Corman movie. There's sometimes like a more obscure kind of film noir. Like there's one with Mickey Rooney in the other week. So not any of the kind of big classic film noirs that we'll have heard of, but kind of cool little
Those are the good ones.
culty materials. And they're all introduced by Caroline Munro, who was the star of Hammer films like Dracula AD 72. She's sitting there in this cool little kind of gothic, cozy environment in a comfy chair, and she says, "Welcome to Cellar Club," and she tells you a bit about the film that's coming up, whether she was involved in it herself or not. And it's just really nice. Every now and then she has a short interview with someone like a scholar or someone who knows about the movie as well.
Well, they've not given me a ring yet. I don't know what's going on.
Well, you never know. It could be about to happen. So,
oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, I'm taping all of them because most of the films, or quite a lot of the films concerned, I've actually seen the film, but I just tape the bits with Caroline Munro and just sit down and watch. They're just 5-minute little bursts, but it does ensure that there's interesting kind of horror type movies on every Friday on Talking Pictures starting at 9 p.m. So
cool. Thanks, Dan. I'll tell him about that. Yeah, and the Horror Channel Halloween weekend. I'll tell him about that as well.
Yeah, brilliant. There we go. Good opportunities for your students.
Yes.
Well then, listener, that's us for this week. Thank you so much for joining us again and hearing us natter on about the strain. Next weekend, it will be Halloween weekend.
Ooh.
So we should release something fun. I'm not quite sure exactly what yet, but we'll be back anyway. Can't believe it's Halloween weekend again, it seems like. It's the second Halloween weekend since lockdown.
It's because we're getting old.
Yeah, comes around quick these days. Oh well. Well then, Stella, thank you so much for your company.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
All right, and we shall do this again soon.
All right.
All right, brilliant.
Bye.
Bye-bye, listeners. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by Stella Gaynor, Howard Whittock, and T.D. Velasquez. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music, and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages at AndNowPod or at Lee Cushing Pod. Follow us on Twitter at AndNowPodcast or at Lee Cushing Podcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now the podcast stops.